The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, 20 years too late. Sarah Mitchell stood at her kitchen counter, staring at the yellowed paper in her hands like it might vanish if she blinked. The postmark read February 14th, 2005. The handwriting was unmistakable, careful, deliberate, the letters slanting just slightly to the right the way they always had when he wrote her name. But Sergeant Daniel Mitchell had been dead for 20 years. Her coffee sat forgotten, steam rising into the morning light. Outside, the neighborhood stirred with ordinary sounds. A car door slammed. Someone's dog barked twice and stopped. The world moved forward like it always did, completely unaware that in this kitchen, time had just folded in on itself. The letter felt impossibly light in her hands. She turned it over slowly, afraid that touching it too much might somehow erase what was left of him. Her son's voice broke through from the doorway. "Mom, you okay?" Sarah looked up. Ethan stood there, 23 now, with his father's jawline in her eyes. He'd been asking that question his whole life, and she'd been lying about the answer for just as long. "It's from your dad," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan went completely still. "What?" He wrote it before he died, before the mission. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was dense, heavy with questions neither of them knew how to ask. Ethan crossed the kitchen in 3 long steps, his hand reaching out to steady the envelope as Sarah's fingers began to shake. "How was that possible?" he asked. After all this time, Sarah shook her head. She didn't have an answer. All she had was this envelope and the weight of 20 years pressing down on her chest. Her mind spiraled backward to the last time she'd seen Daniel. He'd been standing in their driveway in his uniform, duffel bag slung over one shoulder, trying to smile like he wasn't scared. He'd promised her this would be the last deployment. Promised they'd finally buy that house with a big yard. Promised he'd be there when the baby came. He'd kept kissing her forehead over and over like he was trying to memorize the exact height of her, the exact way she fit against him. "I'll be home for Valentine's Day," he'd said. "I promise." That was the last lie he ever told her. 3 weeks later, 2 officers appeared at her door with folded flags and carefully rehearsed condolences. Daniel had died in an ambush. Heroic action. Save his entire unit. The words had meant nothing to her then. They still didn't. Now, 2 decades later, here was his handwriting. Proof that he'd thought about her in those final days. Proof that he'd kept his promise in the only way he could. Sarah's hands trembled as she tore open the envelope. The paper inside was thin, almost translucent, like it had been waiting so long to be found that it had started to disappear. She unfolded it carefully, and Ethan leaned in close, his breath warm against her shoulder. "My love," she read aloud, and her voice cracked immediately. She stopped, pressed her lips together, tried again. "My love, if you're holding this on Valentine's Day, then I kept my promise somehow. I wish it was the way we planned." The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. Ethan's hand gripped her shoulder, steadying her, and she continued. Daniel wrote about the stars over the desert, how he'd look up at night and imagine she was seeing the same ones, thousands of miles away. He apologized for every short phone call, every goodbye that came too fast. He talked about the house they'd buy, the one with the porch swing and the big kitchen where she could finally bake without burning everything. He wrote about their unborn child with a certainty that broke Sarah's heart all over again. "Tell our son that I knew him before I met him. Tell him I was proud of him before he ever took his first breath. Tell him that being his father, even from a distance, was the greatest honor of my life." Ethan's knees buckled. He sank into the chair beside his mother, his hand pressed over his mouth. Tears streamed down his face, and for the first time in his life, he didn't try to hide them. "He knew about me," Ethan whispered. "All this time, I thought I was just the kid he never got to meet." Sarah reached for his hand. "You were never just anything to him." They sat together as morning light stretched across the kitchen floor. The letter trembled between them, a bridge across 20 years of silence. Sarah read the rest slowly, savoring every word, every loop of ink that proved Daniel had loved them until his very last moment. But there was one question neither of them could answer. How had this letter survived 20 years only to arrive now? The answer came 4 days later. Sarah was folding laundry when the doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone. Through the frosted glass of the front door, she could see the outline of a man, tall and rigid, holding something in his hands. When she opened the door, recognition hit her like cold water. Marcus Webb stood on her porch, older now, grayer, but still carrying himself with that same military bearing. She'd met him only once, at Daniel's funeral, where he'd stood at attention with tears running down his face and hadn't said a single word. "Mrs. Mitchell," Marcus said, his voice rough. "I'm sorry to just show up like this. I should have come sooner. A lot sooner." Sarah's heart began to race. "Marcus," he nodded once, his jaw tight. "I need to tell you something. About the letter." She stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in." They sat in the living room, the same room where Sarah had once planned a nursery that Daniel would never see. Marcus held his cap in both hands, turning it over and over like he couldn't figure out where to put it. "I was there," he said finally, "the night Daniel wrote that letter." Sarah went very still. "We were camped out in this bombed-out building, waiting for orders. It was Valentine's Day. Most of the guys were writing letters home, trying to pretend like everything was normal." Marcus's voice wavered. "Daniel asked me to make sure his letter got to you, if anything happened. But it didn't," Sarah said quietly. "Not until now." Marcus closed his eyes. "No, it didn't. And that's on me." The silence stretched long and painful. Ethan appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, watching Marcus with an unreadable expression. "What?" Ethan asked. The single word carried the weight of 20 years. "Why didn't you send it?" Marcus looked at him, and something in his face crumpled. "Because I'm the reason your father didn't come home." The words hit like a physical blow. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "We got ambushed 2 days after he wrote that letter," Marcus continued, his voice barely holding together. "It happened fast. Too fast. We were pinned down, taking heavy fire, and Daniel..." He stopped, swallowing hard. Daniel made a choice. Sarah's hands gripped the armrest of her chair. "What choice?" "He went back," Marcus said. "We were retreating, and he turned around. Told me to get the others out. Said he'd cover us." Marcus's voice broke completely. "I tried to stop him. I swore I did. But he just looked at me and said, 'Make sure Sarah gets the letter. Make sure she knows.'" Tears streamed down Marcus's face now. 20 years of grief finally breaking through. The explosion came 30 seconds later. By the time we got back to him, it was too late. He saved 8 lives that day. 8 of us walked away because he didn't. The room fell into a heavy silence. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. All these years, she'd thought Daniel's death was random. Bad luck. Wrong place, wrong time. She'd never known it was a choice. "You kept the letter," she said softly. Marcus nodded, shame written across every line of his face. "I couldn't send it. Every time I tried, I'd remember that he died so I could live. I'd remember his face when he turned back. And I couldn't." His voice failed him. "I couldn't face you. Couldn't face what I'd let happen." Ethan moved forward, his voice steady despite the tears on his cheeks. "You didn't let anything happen. He chose." Marcus looked up at him, stunned. "My dad made a choice," Ethan said. "He chose to save you. All of you. And yeah, maybe you should have sent the letter sooner. But you're here now. You finally finished the mission." Sarah stood slowly and crossed the room. She placed her hand on Marcus's shoulder, and he flinched like he didn't deserve the touch. "He wouldn't want you to carry this," she said. Daniel never blamed people for surviving. Marcus's shoulders shook as 20 years of guilt finally broke open. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry I waited." "I know," Sarah said. "But you're here now, and that matters." They talked for hours. Marcus told them everything. The jokes Daniel used to tell to keep morale up. The way he'd talk about Sarah like she hung the moon. The photo he kept in his helmet of an ultrasound Sarah had sent him weeks before. He used to show it to everyone, Marcus said, a sad smile crossing his face. He'd say, "That's my son. That's my boy." Like he could already see who you'd become. Ethan wiped his eyes. "I wish I'd known him." "You do know him," Marcus said. "Every story your mom told you. Every choice she made raising you. That was all him too." When Marcus finally stood to leave, Sarah walked him to the door. He paused on the threshold, looking back at her. "The letter came now because I'm sick," he said quietly. "Terminal. The doctors gave me 6 months, maybe less. I realized I was running out of time to keep my promise. I couldn't die knowing I'd failed him." Sarah's eyes filled with fresh tears. "You didn't fail him, Marcus. You survived. That's what he wanted." Marcus nodded, but she could see he didn't quite believe it yet. Some wounds took longer to heal than others. After he left, Sarah and Ethan stood together on the porch, watching his car disappear down the street. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked. Sarah thought about the question. Really thought about it. "I think I will be," she said. "For the first time in 20 years, I think I actually will be." That Valentine's Day, Sarah returned to the cemetery. She'd avoided it for years, unable to face the headstone that reduced Daniel's entire life to 2 dates and a rake. But today felt different. She knelt in the grass, the letter folded carefully in her pocket. Ethan stood beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "I kept living," Sarah said to the stone, "just like you asked me to. I raised our son. I loved him enough for both of us. And he's everything you hoped he'd be." The wind stirred gently through the trees, carrying the scent of early spring flowers. Sarah pulled out the letter one last time and read the final lines aloud, the ones that had broken her heart, and put it back together all at once. "Don't let my absence make your world smaller. Love again if you can. Laugh as much as possible. Choose joy even when it scares you. And if our son ever wonders who his father was, tell him this. I was a man who loved you both more than my own life. And that love doesn't end just because I did." Sarah pressed the letter against her chest, feeling the weight of 20 years finally begin to lift. "You made a home," she whispered. "Just took the long way." Ethan knelt beside her and placed a small flag at the base of the headstone. They stayed there together as the sun climbed higher, warming the earth, melting the last remnants of winter frost. Marcus visited 3 more times before the illness took him. Each time, he brought new stories about Daniel. Each time, the weight on his shoulders seemed a little lighter. When he finally passed, Sarah and Ethan attended his funeral. They stood with his family and told them about the letter, about the promise kept after 20 years. Sarah started volunteering with organizations that supported military families. She helped other widows navigate the impossible grief of losing someone to a war that never really ends. She told them the truth, that grief doesn't disappear, but can transform into something you can carry. Ethan framed a copy of his father's letter and hung it in his apartment. Not as a shrine, but as a reminder. He decided against enlisting, choosing instead to become a paramedic. He wanted to save lives the way his father had, but he wanted to come home at night. He wanted to build the life his father had dreamed of, but never got to live. Every Valentine's Day after that, Sarah visited the grave with flowers, red ones, bright and alive. She'd sit there and talk to Daniel about everything. Ethan's promotions, her garden, the small joys and frustrations of everyday life. And every year, without fail, she'd end the same way. "Thank you for the letter. Thank you for loving us enough to say goodbye." Somewhere across town, in a postal distribution center, a worker sorted through thousands of envelopes without knowing that one of them had changed 3 lives forever. That it had turned absence into presence, silence into voice, and grief into something that could finally, after 20 years, begin to heal. Because some letters aren't late. They arrive exactly when the people reading them are finally strong enough to understand what they mean. And some promises, no matter how long they take, are always worth keeping.